My name's Joey Clark. I'm an ecologist and science communicator with Australian Wildlife Conservancy based in Sydney, and the area that I'm speaking to you from is Gadigal country. We launched this program of webinars a year ago when COVID struck and we were all stuck in our homes as a new way of keeping you all up to date with AWC's work at our sanctuaries around Australia. And thanks to its great success last year, we're back this year with another series of conversations because there's a lot of work going on across all of our sanctuaries and a lot of great people for us to talk to. In case you missed last year's webinars, they're all still available at our website, australianwildlife.org, or you can search for AWC in conversation, and that should take you to the right page as well. And please encourage friends and family to join and share the webinars too. I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Strath Barton. Strath is AWC's Fire Management Officer, and he's joining us live from the Kimberley to tell us about the prescribed burning program that's underway up there now. Strath, welcome to AWC in Conversation.
Hello, welcome everybody.
And Strath, just tell us where you are. So Charnley River is in the Kimberley. How do you get there? How remote is it?
Yeah, so at our sanctuary, Charnley River, I think it's approximately 300 kilometres from Derby, which is about 200 kilometres from Broome. So asphalt most of the way, or all the way to Broome, about 100 kilometres of asphalt up the Gibb River Road, and then 200 kilometres of dirt into Charnley. I mean, that's for people that drive. We just fly around in helicopters at the moment, so we're avoiding that one.
Half your luck. Well, that's pretty nice. And Charnley River is situated more or less in the middle of the Kimberley, where AWC has a very large footprint of wildlife sanctuaries and partnership projects where we're working with traditional owners and government to manage a very large area. Is the reason you're at Charnley because you're able to access all of those areas easily?
Yeah, so it is the most central location we have. Obviously, we're in need of certain things like fuel and whatnot, and good internet. So we're currently here as a central location that's convenient to us. Yeah, you can probably pick it on the map there.
Yeah, so on this map, the green, the areas in light green are AWC sanctuaries, and then our partnership areas are in blue, purple, and pink. So you can see we work with Dambimangari Aboriginal Corporation, Willigan Aboriginal Corporation, and also at Yampi Sound, which is a Department of Defence property on the Kimberley coast. So it is a large area in the Kimberley. In fact, the area we manage through those projects in partnership or alone is around 4.5 million hectares. And then on top of that, we do burning across a central area of cattle and pastoral properties as well. So Strath, I'd like to come to fire management now. And I think for a lot of us joining from Southern Australia, fire in the north is quite a different beast to what we're used to. Can you just talk a little bit about what role fire plays in the landscape and how it's, a different attitude to fire up north?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we're basically, we're using fire here as a tool. It's not a new concept. It's something that's existed for a very long time. In some ways, we're trying to replicate what was in some ways. So basically, we conduct these early burns to reduce the frequency of later fires that are a lot more destructive throughout the landscape. It is an extremely flammable landscape. Parts of it will burn when it's essentially raining, but the performance of fire in this region is a lot less dangerous than what you would expect down south. So it's very rare you would find yourself in a life-threatening situation, fire in the north of Australia.
Yeah, and I guess, part of that is to do with the landscape. So you're mostly working in savanna ecosystems, which are very lightly forested, dominated by, a grassy layer of spinifex and then sparse eucalypts or other trees. And we've got some footage here of fire over the last couple of weeks and showing how low intensity it really is, just trickling along. Beautiful shots there from the work that you've been doing. But we know that the patterns of fire management have changed. So as you mentioned, Aboriginal Australians used fire a lot, and throughout the Kimberley, there would have been fire used almost on a daily basis, we think. And some of that traditional burning has continued to the present day. But there's also been disruption to those fire regimes. And can you just describe to us what happens if we don't do any prescribed burning? What would be the result of that?
Yeah, so I think looking back in time, possibly around or post 2000, there is really good examples of the fire frequency in Northern Australia, not just the Kimberley, but the top end as well as Cape York. Basically what was happening is country was lit and it would just burn all year until everything, well, basically it ran out of fuel. So what we found in doing this work is we're reducing that and turning that around. So the late fire frequency that everybody talks about, which is essentially talking about from the 30th of July onwards, the frequency of fire within that period has been brought back quite significantly.
Yeah, so we know that fire can be a destructive force if it's applied at the wrong time. And I think, the big takeaway from the work that we've been doing up there over the last 15 years is that timing is critical. As we mentioned, it's also a monsoonal climate. So there's a very big wet season every year, which affects the fuel load across the whole of Northern Australia. And this year was an especially big wet season. Has that affected our plans and the fire management that you're doing?
Yes, it definitely has. So, this year we've had 1,150 millimetres in Derby. Our average is 700 mil. So it's been an extremely wet year. The country's looking amazing. What we found this year is we've had a lot more fuel to work with. So it's actually been in some ways a bit more efficient. We've had a lot of grass on the ground. We've been able to get those cool burns in, establish nice fire breaks, which is essentially ground that has burnt. And so we've actually had those breaks occur a lot sooner than what they have in the last 2 years. So a lot less effort for a fairly good product at the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And we know that, bigger, hotter fires that happen late in the dry season can be really damaging. But these, fires at this time of year are low intensity and they tend to leave a lot of cover on the ground for wildlife. So there's still places to shelter. There's still plenty of food resources. So it's quite a different kind of fire just because of the timing. And I think it's a good point now just to show with an image what you're trying to achieve through prescribed burning. So you talked about creating fire breaks that reduce fuel load and limit the spread of those big hot fires that happen later in the year. And I'm just going to share this image you sent me of Yampi. So this is a section where you've done some of that prescribed burning. Can you talk us through the pattern?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually some satellite imagery that we've been generating basically every 5 days when the Sentinel satellite passes over the area we're operating in. Basically what we're looking at, that white shading or lighter shading, is burnt ground. And that line through the middle, red, is actually, it may be a bit hard to see, but it's actually incendiary drops that we've dropped out of the helicopter. So what we're looking at there is great. I'm really, really happy with how that's looking. There's definitely areas that require more work. So there is areas you'll see that are patchy, which is great. But when it comes to having fires later in the year, fire would then spread through those gaps. So we're now at a stage where we're heading back out. We're assessing all of this imagery daily, and we're planning to go in and plug the gaps, basically.
Great. And, I think we kind of talked about this in abstract that, you're doing prescribed burning, but What does that actually involve? You know, you've got an area of over 6 million hectares where you're trying to get burning done in a pattern that's strategic and makes sense, but over a fairly short period of time, just a few weeks. How do you actually access such a big area? Is much of it done from the ground, or, you know, what other ways do you get around?
Yeah, so look, partly there are areas that we are burning from the ground. Because of the scale of the project that we're running, we're using helicopters. We've had 2 to 3 helicopters for the last 3 weeks essentially. Inside of that helicopter we have what's called a rain dance machine. It's essentially a machine that times the drops of these incendiaries that are caps that have a chemical reaction and ignite after about a minute. They drop from the helicopter and then ignite on the ground. So yeah, at this point, we're, as we said, about halfway through the project. We've used about 100 hours in the helicopter. And so it's this huge area to cover. I think we've used something like 20,000 kilometers worth of helicopter time, if that makes sense. So it's been enormous and there's still quite a lot to do.
I think that's about halfway around the equator, something like that. So it's, it's a huge distance to have flown. And that's not just you there. There's a whole team of fire practitioners. Can you talk us through the team that you've got up at Charnley?
Absolutely. So as I sit here speaking to you, we've got a helicopter in the air.
I've just lost you there, Strath. Hopefully the connection will improve in a second. Oh dear. Okay, well, we might just have to stand by and wait for Strath to reconnect. I hope everyone's enjoying this return to AWC in conversation. Is it inevitable that you have a technical glitch on the first one? Maybe. I'm going to share a few more video clips from the burning that's been happening up in the Kimberley over the last few weeks. So Strath has been operating not only in the central Kimberley, but also in an adjacent part of the Northern Territory. So as many of you will know, we've got a partnership project at a cattle station, Bullow River Station, which is in the Victoria River District. And that's been incorporated into our Northwest Regional Fire Management this year, with prescribed burning happening there a couple of weeks ago. The rain dance machine that Strath was talking about basically feeds those incendiaries down a chute. And I've actually got some video of that. So I'll share that with you now while we're waiting for Strath. So it's the patchy pattern of burns that you can see below the helicopter there, which is absolutely textbook example of what we're trying to achieve. Fires at this time of year, when the fuel is so green, they tend to burn the grassy layer, but as you can see, the canopy is unaffected. So it's really maintaining that open grassy structure, but not affecting the larger canopy trees. That's important habitat. I'm going to answer a few more questions while we're trying to get in touch with Strath. We've got one here about the cost of this prescribed burning program. So as we've mentioned, we're conducting this over about, almost 6.5 million hectares. So it's an area about the size of Tasmania in the northwest. Incredibly, it costs about 20 cents per hectare to do this kind of fire management. So we think that's a great way of spending our budget on conservation land management. And, you know, if you're looking for a way of supporting AWC, it's a really worthy cause. So, you know, $1 supports this kind of fire management across 5 hectares. I'd encourage you to donate more than $1 so that you can have a really big impact. But delivering it by helicopter means that it is a really efficient way of delivering good conservation outcomes on the ground. Now, I've got word that Strath is reconnecting, so hopefully we should hear from Strath shortly.
I'm sorry, can you hear me there? Is that?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, I apologise. That's our internet's dropped out at this end.
Bound to happen on the first one. That's fine. So that's how you do it. You're out there in the helicopter using the rain dance machine. And I think you're about halfway through the program. Has that shifted from south to north, or how do you kind of arrange through time the areas that you'll be burning?
Yeah, look, there's no exact rule in the way we're operating. We're essentially in a central location. We're going to the areas that require hitting first. So early in the season, we were targeting older fuel. So we kind of did a round of everything and sort of targeted that older fuel. And then throughout time, as that fuel age has started to take, we've sort of spread ourselves across that landscape. So the difficult thing is we're limited by time. So we've actually we've just put more helicopters in the air this year and tried to spread ourselves across that landscape. I think I touched on before, the team we've got here, currently we're working with our land management officers from all of our sanctuaries. So basically anybody that's here is helping. So that essentially requires somebody navigating in the front. They have a computer where we basically have our imagery, and on top of that we have our flight lines and the direction we're taking. And then in the back, we have somebody running that machine. On top of that, we also have our partner groups, Gumby, Mangari and Willigan. They're both Indigenous ranger groups. They're coming out throughout the week, assisting with the program. And yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been so good to see everybody engaged in it. I think we've basically had rangers here since the start. We've been recording hours. It's about 200 Indigenous ranger hours in the helicopter. There's a lot of other work behind the scenes that everybody's doing, but yeah, it's really great to see. This little video here is a great example of exactly how it works. So you can see that black box is strapped into the helicopter behind the pilot. It actually sits on top of one of the seats. And basically there's a box sitting next to it, a cardboard box full of incendiaries on a reel. That reel, the belt coming out of that reel is fed into the machine. And the person sitting next to that machine is adjusting the speed depending on what the vegetation beneath is doing. And generally the machine's on quite a low rate. I think we run something like 12 caps per minute. So it's quite slow. It spaces them out. You're averaging about 80 knots in the helicopter. So it spaces them out at approximately 200 meters or something like that. So you get these sort of nice blobs of fire that join up over time, is the theory. Yeah, so that machine is inside of those caps. There's Conby's crystals. Those crystals are contained by a sheet of plastic over the top. They get fed through the machine and then they're injected by glycol through a needle. It's all automatic, and as it injects, it also cuts them off the belt and they fall out a chute underneath the helicopter. And that basically, those two components react to one another quite slowly and then ignite about a minute after they're injected. So yeah, quite an amazing tool to have, really.
Strath, how do you feel when you're up there, you know, literally setting fire to millions of hectares across the Kimberley? Has it ever nerve-wracking?
Nervous, very nervous, yes. Yeah, look, I will say I do spend a lot of time back at base and our team are out there. There's a huge amount of planning that goes into this. We're not just going out blind every day and deciding to light a range on fire here or there. It's quite involved. There's months of planning prior to the season, and then throughout we're essentially planning every evening the following day, looking at how things have gone in previous runs and then altering our plan to suit. And yeah, it is very nerve-wracking, but we've got an amazing team here and everybody's having a great time. And I think we're getting some really, really great results this year. It's been fantastic.
It's interesting that you talk about results, because I know another big part of the work is actually tracking the progress of this work. Do you want to just talk us through how you actually record the effort that goes into burning? And I'm just sharing the map here showing all of the flight lines from 2021, including in red on this map areas where you've dropped incendiaries.
Yeah. So look, this is a great example of what we've achieved to date. So basically, every day we set out, we have a GPS sitting in the front of the helicopter recording our track. On top of that, the rain dance machine actually logs every single incendiary dropped. It drops a GPS point, and then, yeah, at the end of the season, we're able to create these fantastic maps. And not only that, a few of our partner groups are involved in carbon abatement programs. This data is extremely important for them to prove where they've been, prove where they've burnt. All of that fuel that's used is then calculated into their abatement. That's not something we're actively involved with at this point, but we certainly assist our partnership groups in achieving their abatement every year.
Yeah, that's right. And I know people are interested in this aspect of it as well, that, you know, doing these early dry season prescribed burns, which are low intensity, they leave a lot of organic matter on the ground. That actually means you're averting greenhouse gas emissions that would otherwise happen if it was left to burn later in the year. And that's how we're able to generate carbon credits across the partnership areas. So as you mentioned, that's a really great incentive and sort of co-benefit for our partners of being involved. And AWC also generates carbon credits at Wongalara and Piccadilly Plains. So that's in the Northern Territory and on Cape York. So we do have a couple of programs where they're actually earning an income from doing this kind of very careful fire management. And, you know, there are kind of degrees of, there's kind of best practice for that, I guess. And in our case, you know, it's driven by promoting ecological health. So protecting biodiversity, getting the best outcome for wildlife, which means that we do a lot of our burning earlier than actually happens in other parts of the north. But, you know, the benefit is still there that we're averting emissions. So that's, you know, that's a fantastic co-benefit of this work. So what's it look like for the next few weeks, Strath? Are you expecting any more rain, or is that completely dry now? And what's left to do for the fire management program this year?
Yeah, so I'm not expecting any rain, but I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. Crazier things have happened. But yeah, look, essentially, we're well into the season. The conditions have changed significantly in the last week. We've essentially established fire breaks throughout the landscape on all of our properties. We now have to make sure those breaks are going to hold up throughout the season. So basically, like I was explaining before with that map, we'll go in and we'll start to do a lot less burning, and we'll basically just be filling in those gaps, making sure everything's solid and preparing ourselves for what could be a fairly significant wildfire season.
Do you say that because it was such a big wet season that you're expecting more fuel and therefore more hot fires later in the dry?
Exactly. So the work we're doing doesn't prevent late fires completely. They're still very much something we have to manage. So there will be fires that pop up this year. I'm expecting the fact that we have had such large rainfall and there has been so much growth, I do anticipate it will be quite a big year. So basically, once we roll out of the burning program, we'll start to prepare ourselves to be ready to respond to fires in the later season. So from August onwards, but possibly before. So there is a cutoff on the 30th of July. That's the carbon cutoff. Anything pre the 30th of July is the early dry season, according to the carbon project, and anything beyond is the late dry season, so therefore wildfire season. But looking at the way things are going, I think some of these fires that occur in July, or possibly even late June, could be quite intense and may require putting out at that stage or monitoring at least.
Thanks, Strath. We might come to some questions in a moment, but it's been really great. I just want to remind everyone too that we've actually just published our most recent edition of Wildlife Matters. If you're not a subscriber, you can sign up on the website to get all of our email updates so that you'll be alerted when there's a new edition available. You can also read all of the articles online. So if you go to australianwildlife.org, you can read the articles or download a PDF copy of the magazine. So jump online, get you a copy of Wildlife Matters. And if you're not already signed up to our email updates, you can do that there as well. And make sure you tell friends and family about our work. Okay, Strath, we'll come to some questions now. And one of them is just about how wildlife is impacted. So, I guess one way of looking at this is, you can't exclude fire completely. What is the difference for a ground dwelling animal that's facing an early dry season prescribed burn compared to one of the big hot fires later in the year?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of work has gone into that throughout the last 15 years with Australian Wildlife Conservancy. Basically, the simplest way to put that would be that essentially we're burning and creating these burns that are quite patchy. Therefore, there's areas that small mammals can actually hide away in that aren't being completely cooked, which is essentially what would happen later in the year and still does in areas. So basically preventing those high intensity fires that occur in the later season, creating a landscape scale varied fuel, or with various fuel ages throughout that landscape. So areas that burnt in 2020 it's very unlikely that they'll burn again in 2021. So creating these low intensity burns annually that then create these landscapes for refuge, basically.
Great. Yeah, I think that's it's a good point that there's actually lots of vegetation left on the ground after these kind of burns. So the goal is a patchy barrier, which still contains a lot of cover, a lot of shelter, but also reducing the distance between patches that are unburned. So instead of just one big fire that wipes out all of the vegetation, the patchy distribution of fire means that for most animals, there'll be somewhere to hide that's relatively close. We've also done a lot of research into feral cats and how their behaviour is affected by fire. So we know that after the big hot wildfires at the end of the year, cats will actively move into an area and hunt along those fire scars or the edge of those fire scars where there are native animals as essentially refugees left without anywhere to go. Whereas the early season burns that we do, these prescribed burns, retain a lot of that cover on the ground. So there's, it's much harder for a cat or another feral predator to hunt in areas where there's more cover. So yeah, overall, it's a really positive outcome. So it's not just about preventing those late season fires, but like you mentioned, Strath, that mix of different aged vegetation is also really important for the ecology of some of these species. So something like the Guldian finch, which some of you will have seen up north, relies on having availability to grasses that are at least 3 years old and producing seed. If you're having hot fires go through every 2 years, there's simply none of that grass old enough to be useful for the Guldian finch. So this work has improved the distribution of that mix of different ages of vegetation. So I think that gives you some idea of how this plays into promoting ecological health across a really big scale, and how it interacts with those other threats as well. Great. Okay, a couple of questions here, Strath, about traditional burning methods in the Kimberley. and I'm not sure if you'll have all the answers to this, but do you know how much is known and how much has been continued of traditional burning techniques and knowledge about how that was done? And how do we try and incorporate that traditional knowledge in AWC's burning program?
Yeah, so I think probably a really good place to start with that is through our partnership groups. So talking to some of our traditional owners throughout the areas we work in, the aim that they, I suppose the way that they are looking at it is there's no longer people living dispersed throughout the landscape. Previously, that may have been the case. Everybody kind of managed certain areas. Therefore, they created this wide distribution of fire scars and managed that land like it was our own backyard, basically. We don't have those people on the ground anymore. Therefore, I suppose the closest thing we've come to is being able to get in the air, get our ranger group, our partnership groups out there. The rangers are getting the chance to go out and manage their patches, and it's kind of it's improving every year. The engagement of our partnership groups is growing, and I think it's something we'd really like to see improving throughout time. But yeah, I think that's probably the most I have to say about it. And my understanding is that that's the view people have, and it's it's definitely better than not doing it, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the traditional methods might not be deployed across large areas at the moment. So we're using drip torches and helicopters. But that ethos of looking after country using fire has really been reinvigorated. And there's very active ranger groups now across Northern Australia, Central Australia, that are, kind of re-embracing a lot of this traditional work. So that's really exciting. We've also had a couple of questions about how we actually measure the impact on wildlife. So for anyone who's visited an AWC sanctuary, you'll know that monitoring of biodiversity is one of the signature programs of AWC's work. So it's key to everything that we do. Our motto is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it effectively. So across all of our sanctuaries, as well as our partnership projects, we establish permanent monitoring sites. These are places where we set different sorts of traps and go back every year to monitor which animals are there, what numbers they're in, what condition they're in. And we gather these long-term data sets so that we can actually report on how different groups are going over time. So the best example of this is what happened to small mammals at Mornington and Marion Downs in the central Kimberley over a period while we were deploying this kind of fire management. So low intensity burns, trying to prevent those late dry season wildfires. We were also destocking, so removing feral herbivores from large parts of that landscape. And through our monitoring over that 10 to 15 year period, we actually saw an increase in the occupancy and abundance of small mammals. And what's really striking about that is that at the same time across Northern Australia, everywhere where data was being collected, small mammals were in decline. So we were really bucking the trend. And we think that if you get fire management right, and if you're able to destock or at least reduce the effect of feral herbivores, they're two really big levers that you can pull that help improve habitat for groups like small mammals. The other group where we've seen good impacts is seed-eating birds. So that's doves, pigeons, the finches, of course, quails, and we carry out a lot of surveys every year targeting those groups, and we've been able to see numbers stabilise. Another one's the northern brown bandicoot, which we hadn't ever detected at Mornington until just a few years ago. So after years of this work, protecting or managing the landscape in a way that improves habitat for these animals, those bandicoots actually reappeared. So they'd been undetected for a long time, and it was really great to add a new species to the sanctuary list after working there for almost a decade. So yeah, that's how we broadly measure the impact that this work has on wildlife. It's through scientific biodiversity monitoring, and that's carried out over the long term. And in fact, our Mornington team is out doing some of this trapping work at the moment. I think we might leave it there. Strath, good luck. Are you going out burning again this afternoon, or are you done for today?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not myself, no, but we do have machines in the air as we speak. So we've got I think we're working on Mornington today, Mornington, Marion Downs and Tablelands. So yeah, it's all happening.
Very good. It's so exciting to hear of that work going on. So thank you for the update. And thank you to all of you who have tuned in. It's been great to be back on Zoom with you all, and we've got an exciting set of conversations coming up. So I hope you'll tune in over the next few weeks to hear more of AWC in conversation. Thank you very much for all of you who do support us. For anyone who doesn't, please, I hope you've been inspired to support this work, and please spread the word too. So if you can invite a friend or a couple of friends to next week's webinar, or get them to sign up to the emailing list, that would be fantastic. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next time.